Our speaker for today's webinar is Rhys Martin, who is the manager of the National Trust's Route 66 initiative. Rhys is a longtime champion of the Mother Road, having traveled the highway from end to end. He currently serves as president of the Oklahoma Route 66 Association, chair of the State Route 66 Association Working Group for the Route 66 Road Ahead Partnership. He's a member of both the Oklahoma Route 66 Centennial Commission and the Tulsa Route 66 Commission, and is an advisor to the Route 66 Alliance. In his role at the National Trust, Rhys leads community outreach along the route, connects sites with needed preservation resources, and supports the success of Route 66 grants and advocacy efforts nationwide. He's also a photographer and is the author of Lost Restaurants of Tulsa from 2018. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Rhys.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's a real pleasure to be here. I had the opportunity to meet a few folks out in Shamrock, Texas, a few months ago to talk with TxDOT and a few others about a historic bridge. There's only one historic bridge left on Route 66 in Texas, and it was good to connect and talk about its significance and importance to the overall story of the road. And I'm really happy to be here today representing the National Trust, where I'll be talking a little bit about. I'll start by talking a little bit about the history of Route 66. I mean, a lot of people know a little bit about the road or have an idea of it, but I always like to kind of go through and talk a little bit more in detail regarding to how it came to be and how it became the road that people are very familiar with today, or kind of know the general story. Then I'll talk a little more about what the National Trust has been doing and kind of how we're preparing for the Centennial, which I cannot believe is just a few weeks away in 2026. So what I'm going to do is I will go ahead and get my screen shared here so that you've got my presentation as I get through this. And now you should have it there. Sam, am I looking good on your side?
Looks good.
Awesome. Thank you. So Route 66, the Centennial's a big deal, but what I'm going to do is, again, not only give you a little bit of history, but talk about what our hopes and dreams are for the next 100 years as the road enters its second century. So thank you very much for that introduction. I am Rhys Martin. As you probably gathered from that, I wear a lot of hats when it comes to Route 66. But I'm with you today on behalf of the National Trust for Historic Preservation and their Preserve Route 66 program. And it's a role I'm very proud to sit in as the road celebrates this really wonderful anniversary in 2026. So, who's the National Trust? We're a national nonprofit that promotes and aids in historic preservation efforts, and whether that means brick and mortar work, digital storytelling, technical support, or even stewardship. We have a couple of sites around the country that we help manage. Our organization is headquartered in Washington, D.C., founded in 1949 by congressional charter, and historically has been a mixture of support from Congress, private donors, and partners such as the National Park Service and state historic preservation offices. But in 1996, the trust divested itself of federal support and became entirely privately funded. The biggest question I'm getting these days is how has the changes in government funding impacted you guys? And I'm happy to say not a lot. It has a little, but not as much as it would have had those changes not been made in the 90s. But among other projects and initiatives, the Trust publishes America's 11 Most Endangered Historic Places each year. We created Historic Hotels of America, the National Main Street Program. We've got the Hope Crew, which that stands for Hands-On Preservation Experience, to help train preservation practices to younger generations. We have more than 2 dozen historic sites, as I kind of mentioned, and we're a big advocate for the Historic Tax Credit Program. So there's a lot of little things that we're involved in, but the Preserve Route 66 initiative is its own little section of support here in the National Trust, and that's what brought me to the table. So when I mention Route 66, whether it's to a person or a group or an organization, that conjures up all kinds of mental images. Maybe it's a Model T loaded up with an entire family's belongings heading to California, maybe hoping for a better life in rough times, or it could be a larger than life roadside attraction like Cadillac Ranch out in Amarillo. That's enticing travelers to stop and spend a dollar or two, or it could be a small town Main Street with a few closed and for sale signs in the windows. But for a road that's just about to enter its second century, it still has a lot of energy and it is still evolving. And it's an attraction unto itself that brings people to the United States from all over the globe. Now, when those first signs went up in 1926, it really wasn't anything special. It was one of hundreds of roads across the country that had just been brought under federal jurisdiction. In the early 1900s, when the automobile was first becoming popular, there was no federal highway agency. Dirt and gravel paths were maintained at the local level. Then there were a few named highways that started popping up to help tie these local roads together. The Jefferson Highway is a really great example. It connected Winnipeg, Canada to New Orleans. The Lincoln Highway connected New York to San Francisco. But still, these connected systems of roads were maintained regionally at best. Each community still had to raise their own money and keep the roads in good shape, and often they were muddy, rutted, and a treacherous proposition for Henry Ford's Model T. And I love this picture because this guy is dressed way too nicely and seems to be in way too good of spirits to be in the situation that he's in. But it's a good example of what things looked like back when people were trying to figure this whole thing out. And that led to the Good Roads movement, which actually, funnily enough, started in the 1880s from the bicycle community. They were saying, hey, these roads aren't really good for our two-wheeled bicycles. But of course, when the cars came around in the 19 teens and it became more of a big deal, that movement gained a lot more traction, so to speak. But a few sections of paved road around the country showed the public what travel could be like if the money was available. This picture here is of a seedling mile in Nebraska, where locals, and these popped up all over the country, where people would come together, uh, invest their money to pave a mile of highway so people could drive across it locally, and then they'd turn around and say, "Well, look how great this is. Now imagine if we had more roads like this," and to convince people to invest in this. So a federal commission was formed in 1925 to create a formal numbered system of highways that connected the country together. One of the men assigned to this commission was a man from my hometown of Tulsa, Oklahoma, Cyrus Avery. Cyrus was born in Pennsylvania, but he moved to the Midwest as a young man. He came to Oklahoma before statehood, made a little money in oil and gas before civic duty beckoned to him. As county commissioner here in Tulsa, he oversaw the construction of the 11th Street Bridge, which is a state-of-the-art concrete span across the Arkansas River here. He brought fresh water to Tulsa at an age where the city had relied completely on bottled water. There was a phrase that locals would say, like if you took a bath in the Arkansas River here, first you'd have to dry off, then you'd have to dust off. And to Avery's dying day, he pointed to the Spavinaw pipeline as the thing he was most proud of accomplishing, even though he's more closely associated with Route 66 these days. But he'd been involved in a couple of named road associations like the Ozark Trail, which also goes through the Panhandle up in Texas. And so he was already a leader in the Good Roads movement at a state level when the federal government came calling. He was a natural fit. This is that 11th Street Bridge, by the way, which is still standing in Tulsa, though its condition is a little worse for wear. That's its own conversation. But he believed that a highway connecting Chicago to Los Angeles could be the strongest commercial corridor in the country. Now, if you've ever drawn a line on a map between those two cities, you'll notice it doesn't go anywhere near Oklahoma or Texas. However, Cyrus Avery was very persuasive. Not only would a more southern route avoid the seasonal climate issues that you have up north, but he also leveraged this newest and safest way to cross the Arkansas River, this wonderful concrete bridge. And so, coincidentally, the route also went past his service station and tourist court here in Tulsa. I'm sure that was just happenstance. But so when Highway 66 was created, it dipped down through Missouri, across Oklahoma and the Texas Panhandle, instead of going through like Nebraska, Colorado, more of like a Santa Fe Trail kind of alignment. And because of that, Cyrus Avery is known as the father of Route 66. And the fact that the next year he established the U.S. Highway 66 Association. Uh, Tulsa has kind of glommed onto the title capital of Route 66 because of all of the stuff that happened here. But that national association was a big deal. This tells us kind of how the road came to be physically, but it doesn't really tell us what made it special. And some of that was intentional. This national association was formed to help advertise the road as the best way west, and to encourage communities to prioritize paving and development. It also gave the road its first nickname, which is the Main Street of America. I love this logo here. This was created in 1934. Their PR efforts went beyond a slogan, though. The association was a partner in the 1928 Transcontinental Foot Race, popularly known as the Bunyan Derby. This was a competition that took runners from Los Angeles east on this patchwork of Route 66 to Chicago, then on to Madison Square Garden in New York, which is just unreal to think of today, let alone in 1928. This was won by a gentleman from Oklahoma. His name was Andy Payne, a young Cherokee farm boy. And he won $25,000, which, is way more than $25,000 today. But that kept Route 66 in the newspaper for months across the country. Another great example is the 1932 Olympics in Los Angeles. This organization took out an ad in the Saturday Evening Post, and I'm going to quote directly from that article describing US 66 as the shortest, best, and most scenic route from Chicago through St. Louis to Los Angeles. From the bustling Middle West, it is a high-speed carry-all into the historic and romantic West, the land of limitless panorama and the home of ageless antiquity. I mean, I can't say it any better than that. So, I mean, it's just incredible, especially when you had to pay by the letter for these articles. But it was more than tourists that found value in the highway's ease of travel. Migrant farmers escaped the devastation of the Dust Bowl and headed west, which ironically increased traffic and commercial development on 66 during the Depression due to these folks that needed services as they went towards the Pacific Ocean. After Will Rogers' death in a tragic plane crash in 1935, the road received the moniker the Will Rogers Highway as it symbolized his journey west. In 1938, Route 66 became fully paved. It took 12 years to pave this road from end to end, meaning it was now a true all-weather highway connecting Chicago and Los Angeles. There was a huge celebration in Amarillo celebrating this fact, August of 1938. Um, the next year, it was featured in John Steinbeck's novel The Grapes of Wrath, and that gave Route 66 its most famous nickname, the Mother Road. So things are going well, things are really positive, but I know we have a lot of history lovers on this call. You know what's coming, and that is the storm clouds that became World War II. And I'm not going to go into a detailed history of that, but Route 66 was of vital importance as this newly fully paved thoroughfare was a key part of military movements in the desert as our boys trained to enter the battle in North Africa. It's also a big part of the national mobilization effort, getting materials where they needed to be, especially out west. And all promotional efforts went on hiatus during the war. You had rationing and all that. So Route 66 became much more utilitarian, but it continued to build on this legacy that would eventually make this road a legend. Um, it did similar to the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl era. It did strengthen the motel industry and other travel services in areas around military bases and production facilities. But once the war ended, automobile ownership exploded, and Route 66 entered what is generally referred to as its golden age. And you can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes. I'm not a huge fan of that terminology, but it is the era that most people associate with Route 66. It was this prosperous time, and American families could make good on seeing the wonders that Route 66 would lead them to, like the Grand Canyon. That National Highway Association was reformed and became a connector for businesses and communities along all 2,448 miles of Route 66. A man named Jack Cutbirth, who was a barber in Clinton, Oklahoma, became their only paid employee and remained in that position for 30 years until the association eventually folded in the late 1970s. He would give out pamphlets like what we have here on the slide to connect people. That white box compliments of would have a stamp of wherever people picked that up. And he and his wife Gladys started those efforts to intentionally stitch together each of these communities along the highway's length and started turning it into what they call a linear village now, where people in Springfield knew the people in Oklahoma City who knew the people in Shamrock, and let people know you're a part of something greater. And Route 66 had turned into this symbol. It meant freedom to go where you want and see the things that make this country what it is. It sounds really cliche, but Route 66 still very much occupies that kind of association and place in most people's mind. It was more than just a way to get from A to B. But getting from A to B as quickly and safely as possible had its own appeal, and it wasn't long before more storm clouds began appearing. Uh, Sorry, the dog decided now is the best time to bring his squeaky broccoli in here, so I'm gonna try to get him out of here. Um, so, buddy, here, give me that. Inspired by the Autobahn in Germany, President Eisenhower signed the National Interstate and Defense Highways Act in 1956, which started the wholesale replacement of Old Route 66. The first major bypasses actually took place. Again, I'm from Oklahoma. I don't mean to lean so much on Oklahoma in this presentation, but it's the place where the road was also first bypassed in a major way with the Turner Turnpike that connected Tulsa and Oklahoma City. A few years after that, another one went up that connected Joplin to Tulsa. And so by the time these interstates started being built and developed, you could already get from Joplin to Oklahoma City without having to touch the old Route 66 alignment. And it was basically off and running. Anybody that has seen the movie Cars kind of knows what's getting ready to happen. And it's really interesting when I talk to groups of students especially because I'll ask, how many of you have seen Cars? And they all raise their hands. And I tell them, look, it's really kind of more of a documentary than people give it credit for. You know, the places, the people, the story itself are all lifted directly from the story of Route 66 that really happened. You know, entire towns were bypassed, underground pedestrian walkways, which were necessary in many areas because of the high traffic volume. Those were covered, were filled in or abandoned. The road was relegated to like business routes and things like that before 1985 when it was officially decertified, literally taken off the map. But of course, that's not where the story ended, as I hope we're all generally aware, even though people had essentially closed the book on it. Uh, Another barber, coincidentally, from Seligman, Arizona, was a leading voice in the preservation movement. Angel Delgadillo, seen here outside of his original barber shop, remembers the day when Route 66 was bypassed and they opened I-40 through around his community. And he's compared it to like a water faucet, like it get turned off. All the traffic just completely stopped. And he spent a decade trying to get Route 66 designated as historic through his town and further west there in Arizona. Because of his tenacity and passion, the first state Route 66 Association was formed in 1987, and was successful in getting that section of highway designated historic. Excuse me. Within 2 years, all 8 states along the Route 66 footprint had their own association with the same goals. At about that same time, author Michael Wallace published Route 66, The Mother Road. His book was a love letter to Route 66 and showed people the road was still there, still worth traveling. And that snowballed eventually into the Pixar crew as they're researching Cars, coming out and learning about it. And then when Cars came out in 2006, it brought the story to a whole new generation. So Route 66 is now this worldwide phenomenon that's been enduring this period of revitalization ever since, for about the last 20 years, where you have this road that's a window into the past. You can experience a version of 20th century America that shows what the country was like before shopping malls and chain outlets. And international travelers are the majority of folks that enjoy, especially a long form trip on Route 66 between Chicago and Los Angeles. Thousands of them come to America and decide that's the lens they're going to view the entire country through. It's big cities and small towns and farmland and scenic vistas. And in my various roles with Route 66, I mean, I've met people from just about any country you can name. This picture here, this is a group of travelers from New Zealand, where they even bought this Lincoln to take the trip. Behind them are a whole bunch of Mustangs they rented in Chicago heading out. This is the Brush Creek Bridge in Baxter Springs, Kansas, the only Marsh Arch style bridge left on Route 66. Some other countries have their own organizations. Route 66 in Germany has an association that organizes motorcycle tours a couple of times a year. I love talking to travelers from the Czech Republic because they very eagerly tell me, sometimes in broken English as best as they can, that they grew up behind, the wall of communism. And again, as cliche as it is, Route 66 represented freedom to them and this experience of going where you want to go, when you want to go, and just enjoying the spirit of the road trip and just this open experience where the sky is literally the limit. And, it'll never, I'm very passionate about Route 66, as I'm sure you can tell, but it'll never mean the same to me as it does to these people. And it's just an honor every time I get a chance to visit with them. But it all serves as an example that you never know who you're going to meet out on the road and where they might be from. So that gives us a general timeline of Route 66 of kind of beginning to where we are today. But that's just a timeline. That's just kind of a history lesson. Now we kind of talk about what's next. Where are we at today? And so, we typically think as of the interstate highway system in the 1950s as the era of shifting priorities, the destination as opposed to the journey. But as I researched and I learned more about the history, things evolve, things change, but other things stay the same. In the 1920s, when Cyrus Avery was first getting involved with all of this and they're coming together with people from all over the country, they were having those same discussions even then about, do these highways increase the ease of travel and bypass towns? Do they connect communities along the way? What do we want to accomplish and how do we want to create this national highway system? So, of course, Cyrus Avery, who I already mentioned, was an advocate for connection, and that's the role that Route 66 played when it was the best way west. Um, he saw 66 as not just being a commercial corridor, but being something that people could be proud to be a part of, and something that kept these communities together. That's what led to the Main Street of America being that first nickname, because it was Main Street in so many of the communities that it went through. Um, and that legacy, of course, with the interstate coming through, had its own changes. But I believe that's why Route 66 has been able to remain so resilient in the face of all of its challenges. Um, there's another quote I'm going to read here from a 1932 speech that Mr. Avery gave in Rolla, Missouri. And he said, US 66 has an advantage over any other highway leading from east of the Mississippi to the Pacific coast in that it crosses between Chicago and St. Louis every important interstate highway originating in what is known as the original 13 states and constituting one of the most thickly populated sections of the United States. Continuing, it is almost a direct route from St. Louis to Springfield, Joplin, Oklahoma City, and on west to Hallbrook, Arizona, where it intersects or crosses every important highway leading from the Atlantic to the Pacific except US 10 and US 80 and every major interstate highway included in this master system of highways. And I admit, until I read some of Avery's writings and delved a little deeper into his work, of course, I knew the importance that Route 66 had to the communities it went through, but I hadn't seen it really as a connector of the other highways in the way that he'd stated it. And indeed, it's not just a connector of communities, it's a connector of paths to these places that are not anywhere near Route 66. Once the interstates did come through, of course, there were a few ways to react. One was resistance, one was ambivalence, and another was adaptation. I mentioned Jack Cutbirth earlier as their only paid employee and the treasurer of their association. He was the voice of 66 as this new network took shape across the country, and Jack chose adaptation. He knew they couldn't stop the interstate, but they could try to work with it, much like how the old highway went with the land itself rather than cut through it. They lobbied for formal interstate business loop signage and inclusion on government maps, which was partially successful. But as I mentioned, there were 5 interstate highways. I don't know why I-40 isn't listed on this pamphlet, but this was the last one that organization produced in the 1970s. And you can see here, you see in a lot of hobby shops and stuff that Route 66 shield with the red, white, and blue color scheme. Those shields were never that color. They were always black and white. And so my eye twitches a little bit when I see red, white, and blue because that's the interstate color scheme. And that interstate's what killed Route 66. And so, I'm a little skeptical about that, but I also understand it's colorful. And I realize now looking at this, it actually says I-40 on top of the sign. That's why it's not listed down below. I wonder how many times I've said that and not realized that. Anyway, but after Jack passed away in 1977, that was it for this organization. They closed their doors, and then Route 66 was removed from the map, as I mentioned earlier. Um, but in '89, all 8 states either had their own association or were organizing their own association. And that's where a lot of the preservation advocacy started to bubble up. You had people putting up signs like these here in Oklahoma. War Acres on the outskirts of Oklahoma City, from my research, is the first community to put one of these up. And now they're in all 8 states. I'm really happy to see that TxDOT has been adding some signage along I-40 and through some of the communities that have the Texas Route 66 kind of brown sign, similar in style to this. Um, you know, uh, if we could go back and pluck someone from Arcadia, Oklahoma, in the late 1980s, this is the Round Barn in Arcadia, one of the most photographed attractions on 66 today. And if we could go back to then and tell them this barn is going to be fully restored by a group of volunteers and it's going to become one of the most famous attractions on the entire highway, they'd probably send you in to get your head examined. But I mean, it's one of many on a landscape full of passion projects, of unique people, of crazy ideas to make the road what it is. It's more than a living museum. It's this evolving ribbon of storytelling and common purpose. There have been multiple national level organizations over the last 3 decades that have stepped forward to help provide resources and help study the highway and aid in its continuing legacy. The National Park Service was first out of the gate, directed by Congress to study the road and recommend commemoration and preservation activities in 1990. And it would be remiss to talk about the road's evolution without quoting my friend and colleague Kaisa Barthuli's favorite passage in the 1999 legislation that created their preservation program, which is here. The Secretary of the Interior shall provide assistance in the preservation of the Route 66 corridor in a manner that is compatible with the idiosyncratic nature of the Route 66 corridor. And we all love to say how we're pretty sure this is the only piece of congressional legislation with the word idiosyncratic in it. but it is very, I mean, that's very true of Route 66. This program not only provided grants and technical assistance, but it showed people what was possible and that you could bring life back to communities that had been decimated by interstate bypasses. It showed people that their stories were important beyond the town limits and that the road still had new stories to tell. This 10-year program was so successful, it was officially extended for an additional decade through 2019. Many people don't know that are in the Route 66 circles even that legislation also called for a permanent private nonprofit to be established to carry on the mission once the corridor preservation program was gone. In 2013, a strategic roundtable spearheaded by the World Monuments Fund came together in Anaheim, California, to chart the future of Route 66 as a linear community. Using an economic impact study by Rutgers, the first of its kind for the highway, more than 100 folks from all across the road came together, talked about collaboration and preservation, tourism. There were panel discussions, presentations, mixers, and even a tour of the brand new Cars Land at Disneyland. But in short, it was a talk about the future. One of the results of that conference was the formation of the Route 66 Road Ahead Partnership, which turns 10 years old next year. This photo is of the group in Albuquerque, all wearing our national hats, even though we all come from different organizations. At the time, I was the brand new president of the Oklahoma Route 66 Association. My former leader, Amy Webb, is on the far left there in the gray shirt. She was representing the National Trust and their Preserve Route 66 program. But this group has been working for the last decade behind the scenes to set up a framework for ongoing support of the highway. Some things have been successful, other things have not, but it's all been a learning experience. And it was when I joined this group, it was clear that it was peopled by passionate advocates for the success of the road's evolving story, not just in the field of preservation, but education, promotion, revitalization, and collaboration. Many of the projects that that organization has worked on ended up being folded into the overall national Centennial efforts, such as a consistent national communications plan, website and event calendar that connected the road together, preservation and economic development grants, preservation toolkit to help folks new to the road understand how to take care of the road's many landmarks and historic properties. There's going to be a national kickoff celebration next year in Springfield, Missouri on April 30th, which honors the date that Route 66 got its number. That's a whole story unto itself. That would take the next, half of my time here if I went into it, but it's fun. Not to mention guidance and support outside agencies to tie Route 66 into their efforts, such as designating Route 66 as a national civil engineering landmark, which just happened this summer. Work to get Route 66 designated as a national historic trail, which was just reintroduced in Congress just a few months ago on the Senate side, spearheaded by your own Senator Ted Cruz, which was a shock to all of us at the Trust. He hadn't really been plugged into Route 66 from our perspective. And then he introduced this legislation, which we were very happy about. We've been also advocating for a Route 66 stamp series, which is going to be published in 2026. And not to be dismissed, the Road Ahead has also provided the opportunity for statewide Route 66 organizations to connect regularly, share updates, and seek input from their compatriots along the road. I had the pleasure of coming out to that meeting I mentioned at the top of the call in Shamrock, partially because the Texas Route 66 Association had looped me in saying, hey, this meeting's happening. If you can make it, that'd be really great to have your perspective. And for a corridor that's more than 2,400 miles long, it's hard to kind of stay abreast of everything that's happening, especially right now with the Centennial happening and all this development. So now we get to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. They've been engaged with Route 66 for quite a few years. In 2008, the Trust listed the road as a whole as part of their annual 11 Most Endangered Places list. A decade later, the Trust hit the road in a custom Airstream trailer to garner support for the original introduction of National Historic Trail legislation. And through that road trip, the Trust received a sizable donation specifically for Route 66 preservation, which led to further technical engagements, a few grant programs, mapping and storytelling work in the GIS space, which I'm really excited about. We built a legacy business database, and then eventually the Preserve Route 66 manager position that I occupy today. It's been remarkable to come into communities and let them know their story is important on both a national and international level if they're not aware of the real impact Route 66 has across the globe. There's still so many people out there that think Route 66 is just a road like any other, or it's just, the road I get to work or that I go down to do my shopping on or things of that nature. But it really has an incredible legacy. And to date, the trust has been able to give out over $2 million worth of grants to nonprofits and legacy businesses along Route 66 to help with a variety of needs from preservation studies to signage to brick and mortar restoration and a whole lot more. So that brings us to today. So much passion and hard work has been building towards this moment, the 100th birthday of Route 66. People of all kinds are wanting to get involved with the road in some form or fashion. Some of them, I'll say, are still trying to figure out what they want to do. And I work with them not to criticize them for coming to the table at the last minute, but just celebrating the fact that they're here and we're here to help. But all of this energy is invaluable. It's answering the question, does Route 66 still exist? Which, of course, yes, very much so. And the entire community has the next year to make sure everybody knows it. Not only is it still here, but there's a lot of activity. I've lost count how many different groundbreakings and projects I've been able to go to in the last 12 to 18 months. And my calendar for next year already looks like a bag of Skittles with all the different, meetings and invitations and road trips that I have planned to get out and spend time in these communities. And I expect in 2027, a lot of the other national groups and stuff that might be interested right now, we'll find the next big shiny thing, but the road will still be here. The trust will still be here. These communities will still be here. And, one of the projects I'm working on that I'll talk about here in a minute is a national caravan its focus is going to be highlighting both preservation success stories as well as the ongoing need for preservation support beyond 2026 because there's a great opportunity for this momentum to just continue to build. So, what do we highlight? And it's, we already know in these communities what makes Route 66 special and what it is that we need to highlight and make sure that people get when they go through these communities or learn about them or study them to decide if they want to do a road trip on Route 66. Irish writer and poet George Augustus Moore said, "A man travels the world over in search of what he needs and returns home to find it." And that's Route 66. The future of the road has to be what made it special in the first place, and that is connection. It's already what brings people here from all over the world. And it's not a curated experience. It's not a singular landmark that's in a history book. It's something unexpected. It's something real, something that connects us, even if we don't speak the same language. Conversely, that also makes it a little difficult to measure metrics on something like this, especially when I deal with tourism agencies and economic development folks who are like, well, how much money is spent on Route 66? How many travelers do Route 66 every year? And it's really hard to put numbers on this because every Route 66 trip is different. Everybody has different stops. And so you really have to piece together the best thing that you can. And I mean, even the places like, Cadillac Ranch is a good example in Amarillo, or the U Drop Inn in Shamrock, or the Midpoint Cafe in Adrian, is a spiral bound notebook at front that people sign their names in. It doesn't get digitized or shared in any other way. But it's this corridor of favorites and cultural diversity. It's a little bit of everything. And so every traveler's trip is going to look a little different. Route 66 is a connector to our past. Places like the Osterman Filling Station, pictured here in Peach Springs, Arizona, bring to life a story that had almost been forgotten. Travelers would go through this community not understanding it was the home of the Wallapai Nation. And this old shell station had a caved-in roof, a wall had collapsed, and there was just a shred of hope of it surviving. But it was an important part of the community story. And with the help of the National Trust for Historic Preservation and our Hope crew that I mentioned earlier, today it stands as a monument to that shred of hope. It is possible. And now the tribe has the opportunity to share their story, their unique history, with people from around the world. It can also be a place where the elders can share their life experience with the next generation and provide them with a reminder that it's okay to slow down. Route 66 is a connector of communities, as I've mentioned a few times. Tourism is typically an us or them game. Come here and experience what we have to offer, but don't go over there. Route 66 is different. Here, the journey is the destination. What Joliet, Illinois is good for Braidwood. What Joplin does is good for Galena, Kansas. What Shamrock does is good for McLean, is good for Groom, is good for Amarillo. Folks are on the road to experience it all. And the more we can do to keep people on the road, the better it is for everyone. The tri-state area in Southwest Missouri, Southeast Kansas, and the northeast tip of Oklahoma is a really great example of that in action. They all work together. Kansas only has 13.2 miles of Route 66. It just clips the edge of the state. And so they don't have a lot of resources or a lot of energy to do a lot of the things that the other states are able to do. But by working together with their neighbors, they're able to do more. And, promoting one another increases the amount of time travelers will spend in these communities, meaning more tax dollars, more opportunities to share their stories, and more opportunities for other people to say, hey, I really want to be a part of this. Route 66, more than anything else, though, is a connector of people. And for it to survive another 100 years, it must continue to be that. I'll give you a great example of the kind of connection that I'm talking about. Back in 2018, I stopped at the Highway Cafe in Veneta, Oklahoma. This was my first time in. I was really just getting to understand the highway. And I'd heard good things about this little diner, and I figured I'd check it out for myself. I pulled into the gravel lot and found it quite full. I walked around the building, took a few photos before I went in. I took a seat at the counter, and an old man that had walked in behind me took the seat to my right. And he started talking. He said, I saw you taking some pictures outside. I nodded. That's good, he said. I've got some good stuff. They've got some good stuff to photograph. He was very proud, clearly. I remarked on the murals outside, and the waitress came over, greeted my neighbor first. She's, Hi, Leonard, like he was family. Do you want some coffee? Though it was a rhetorical question. She'd already begun to pour it. I followed his lead, got some coffee myself, and I asked him, are you from the area? Of course, I knew that was the right answer. But he said, yeah, I lived here my whole life. And I asked him if he remembered when Route 66 was the main highway. And he said, well, I remember when this was just a two-lane. And I remember when my uncle or my great uncle, I guess it would be, came into Veneta on the train. I'm 72 now. That was a long time ago. It used to flood so bad around here. The only way you could get out was in my dad's truck. He had it was old then, a 1941 International Harvester. Do you know what that is? Well, anyway, it was the only vehicle we had that could get to town when it was like that. So we ordered, and I asked him where he was. I got biscuits and gravy. He got a burger. These diners serve breakfast all day, and I'm a sucker for that kind of thing. He asked me where I was from, and I told him I was from Tulsa. And I could see him search his memory a little bit, and he started talking again and said, I had family in Tulsa, and we'd visit from time to time. When we get to town, I remember seeing a radio tower. Or, no, maybe there was a couple of radio towers. They were on Denver or something. I don't remember where they were, but we'd drive all the way into town and stay a while and pass those same towers on the way home. And I smiled, and that got me to talking about, these are the old KVOO towers that would send the radio station and Bob Wills, out everywhere. And I mentioned Bob Wills, sparked another memory. And he talked to me about how an old barn up there was a place where Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys would come up and play music, and people would come from miles around, some of them on horseback to hear him play. And oh, then the barn burned down some years later and it was gone. And our conversation dwindled once the food arrived. But throughout my visit there, people would come in, Leonard would say hi to them. He'd chastise somebody for not mowing their grass in a timely manner. It was very clearly a place where the locals really enjoyed connecting and sharing and listening. Um, I finished my meal and thanked Leonard for the conversation. I went over to the cash register and, how was everything? And I said it was everything great. And she said, is this together? And nodded towards Leonard, who was still engaged with his neighbor. And I smiled and nodded because that's what you do for your friends. Leonard passed away in 2023. So many people spoke up and had stories just like mine. And that experience isn't unique to Leonard or Veneta or to Oklahoma. It's the story of the entire road. And when I talk to Route 66 to a newcomer, I tell them it's full of people that can turn a 10-minute visit into 2 hours if you let them. And I encourage them to lean into that experience. Talk to other travelers and listen to their story. They're going to want to know your story too. Business owners want to know where you've been, and many of them have recommendations as you continue your journey. And I sit here today to tell you it's not just a chance meeting with an outsized personality that makes the road special. You can walk into a place and just feel this connection when it's done right. You can't build it. You just have to will it into being. And Route 66 has a quality that attracts people that have this kind of power. It's not easy. It's a lot of work. There are setbacks and disappointments, but if your heart's in the right place and the stars align just right, you'll find a family out on the two-lane highway. That's why people still talk about Bob Waldmeyer and Gary Turner and Laurel Kane and these folks that if you knew them, you knew they were part of your journey and they're somebody you wanted to reconnect with. That's how people like Angel Delgadillo, who's still around at 98 years old, and Michael Wallace, who's pictured here on the left with Bob Waldmeyer, the late artist. That's how these people continue to inspire others. and led people to make their own business on Route 66. The gentleman on the right here at the Aztec Motel in Seligman is from the Netherlands. Sebastian de Border came on a motorcycle, fell in love with the road, came back, bought a hotel, and now serves Route 66 travelers himself in his own unique space. Most people want to feel like they're a part of something greater than themselves. This remarkable highway provides that kind of common ground. There's another phrase of Michael Wallace's that I bring out when the time is right, is that Route 66 is two blue states with a bunch of red states in the middle, which means the road itself is purple. It's a very divided time, and it's great to have something that usually overrides that division. Route 66 is still more than a road. It's still a symbol. And no matter who you are in this country, whether you're within it, from it, or from outside of it, you can find your reflection somewhere on it. The problem with predicting the future is that it's always changing. There are forces outside of our control that can rock the foundations of even our most dedicated efforts. But if you take only one thing away from this presentation, let it be that Route 66 has always been a road of the future. It has evolved time and time again and come back from the edge of complete irrelevance, but it has survived. It continues to appeal to an international audience across generations. It doesn't mean the same thing to the children of today as it did to their grandparents, and yet Route 66 has always represented freedom. Again, that same cliche comes up over again and again and again. It has always been the open road and the doorstep to possibility. Every child that lights up when they see cars for the first time, or a couple that decides to take a road trip for their honeymoon, or social media follower that decides they have to see this big concrete blue whale for themselves, or spray paint a Cadillac sticking out of the ground. Every worn down workaholic that takes the off ramp and discovers a world they thought had been lost forever. These are all people that make up the next generation of roadies along Route 66. It's been here for a long time, and as long as it stays authentic to the American landscape, it'll be here for a long time to come. Now, very briefly, I will just highlight a couple of things that the trust is actively working on right now. Grants is a big one. We've given out over $2 million in grants across all 8 states over the last few years, and projects are underway across the corridor. I mentioned GIS work with Route 66. We have this great Route 66 postcard road trip. We worked with the Newberry Library and scanned in a postcard archive completely and built a few story maps out of it, along with some others that show the evolution of the road and a few other things. We just recently launched a hub with Google Arts and Culture that features a bunch of stories from along Route 66, as well as this really interesting Route 66 Rewind part of the experience, which uses a little bit of their internal AI to take historic landmarks like what's pictured here, the Threet Filling Station in Luther, Oklahoma. Using historic photographs, you click a rewind button and it animates it and shows it what it would have been like back in the day. Really, really cool stuff. The Main Street of America documentary tour. We're their national engagement partner for this wonderful documentary that's doing 26 historic screenings across Route 66 in September, October of 2026. I know they're talking to Shamrock and then I think Amarillo and about some showings as they go across the corridor. And I mentioned I am working on a Route 66 caravan that's going to take a group of cars from Santa Monica all the way to Chicago that the public will be invited to join and leave at their leisure, but providing some kind of focal point that crosses Route 66 in the Centennial year so that every community gets a chance to participate. So that's the end of my presentation. I appreciate your attention, and I'm absolutely more than happy to answer any questions you have, any comments, or anything else I can possibly do to be of value.
Thank you so much, Rhys. It was a really great presentation, and your passion for Route 66 really shines through. And I have to commend your focus, even with the distraction of the dogs, with the broccoli. Um, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and drop those in the Q&A. I also did want to mention that Preservation Texas has a story in the Google Arts and Culture virtual exhibit that's called Rolling Through Time in the Texas Panhandle. So go ahead and check that out. I see a couple of questions. The first one is, does the federal government maintain Route 66, or was it transferred back to local jurisdiction like state highways?
Great question. And so when Route 66 was bypassed piecemeal as all the interstates came through and they were business loops and things like that. But then in 1985, part of the national initiative to decertify the road was really underlining the fact, look, this is no longer the federal government's responsibility. If it's in the city, it's the city's responsibility. If it's in the county, it's the county's responsibility. And if it's a state highway, the state highway department is responsible for it. which is part of the reason why you have such a hodgepodge of condition of the road in different states and in different jurisdictions. Signage is a little different, maintenance is a little different. Sometimes it says Route 66, sometimes it doesn't. So today it's very much a patchwork, funnily enough, like it was in the early days before Route 66 came into being. The federal government, even the National Centennial Commission that was put together for the celebration, has no money, has no teeth, has no real engagement beyond, hooray, let's have a party. Even though they don't have money to do it. We're hoping that the legislation that's in both the House and the Senate right now to get Route 66 designated as a National Historic Trail will help at least bring some federal support to it, probably through the National Park Service, like the Corridor program was from 1999 to 2019. But the actual maintenance of the highway and things like that is up to a bunch of different people.
So the National Historic Trail designation, that would just kind of open up the door for funding. Is that the main
Right.
incentive?
Yeah, it doesn't come with funding attached to it, but it that kind of designation is kind of like getting listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It's a badge of honor that then gets other people interested and could do that. There are other national trails in this country, none that kind of the only other one that's within the automobile era is the Selma to Montgomery Trail. But it would bring the National Park Service in as a permanent partner rather than this temporary up for every 10 years kind of engagement deal with Congress. And that would start the clock on like a 2-year process to create a corridor management program and a bunch of other things that would help the road maintain some kind of semblance of organization going forward.
Has any part of Route 66 been incorporated into the interstate highway system?
Yes, there are sections of the highway, especially in like the New Mexico area, parts of Arizona, where old 66 was literally obliterated and modern day I-40 is right on top of it. Um, every state except Oklahoma and Kansas, you have to get on the interstate somewhere because the road kind of goes off into private land or it no longer exists anymore. Or when the interstate took over from 66, they just, maybe it's a frontage road and something like that. In Texas, it's a lot of frontage along I-40, but you have some really great areas, especially west of Shamrock, McLean, that area where it does kind of diverge from the interstate a little bit and you get a little bit of that original look. Um, but the estimate is about 85% of old 66 is still there and is still drivable if you know where to look. There are all kinds of guidebooks and stuff to help you stay on that original road because again, signage isn't uniform.
Yeah, cool. Okay, any other questions? Go ahead and drop those now. Somebody's asking for your contact info. I think you maybe had that on your last slide.
I did. Yeah, so first of all, you can Google my name and I have a pretty wide digital footprint. It'll come up all over the place. My National Trust email address, I'll drop it into the chat here, is rmartin@savingplaces.org. Um, But you can reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to help with anything. Also with the resources the trust has, or even resources that isn't part of the trust. Aren't part of the trust. I try to stay aware of other resources that are out there, or other things that are happening. Again, to try to make this corridor feel a little bit smaller. And sometimes there might be local or regional resources available. Or at the very least, making sure the right people are at the table when decisions are being made.